we will finish up, and then we're gonna, and that's the gonna be the end of our class today, and midterm next week. Okay, so what we have done yesterday is to look at the trend of income inequality, and what you have seen is basically that in most developed countries, income inequality has increased. Okay, so we looked at the reasons why that may have happened. Okay, one is the international trade. So according to the Samuelson-Stolper theorem, that trade between developed country and developing countries, that developing countries have relatively more supply of unskilled workers, and when they trade them, then the developed countries will specialize in making products that uses the more skilled workers, and then it will end up making the skilled workers' wage to go up relative to the unskilled workers' wages. Okay, and then there are some support from data for that argument. And then second, we have looked at the increased immigration, and our basic conclusion is that increased immigration has some basis for increasing income inequality, but actually in the data, we cannot see a clear evidence that immigration actually contributed to increased income inequality. Actually, no, if you think of a trend of income inequality, also the thing is that, as I said, for the past 5 years, Korea's income inequality has lessened, but still, actually, the number of immigrants has increased. So in the sense that it doesn't fit timing much anyway. So it doesn't seem to be immigration doesn't seem to be a big issue here. Okay, the last one that I want to talk about is the biased technological progress. Okay, so the idea here is, in short, actually biased technological progress received lots of attention as a source of increasing income inequality, because the idea itself is actually quite simple. Over the past 20, 30 years, the technological progress has happened in the way to make skilled workers more productive relative to unskilled workers. Okay, so the idea goes something like this: we have now used lots of information and communication technology, right? Lots of let's say robot technologies and all those new technologies, and these new technologies are advantageous to skilled workers. So skilled workers use those technologies pretty well, or the technology is developed in a way to increase the productivity of skilled workers. So skilled workers actually became much more productive compared to unskilled workers. So in that sense, because they are more productive, there are more demand for those skilled workers. Okay? So that's the gist of the argument. Okay? Then you can, say you can make an argument that, okay, because they are more productive, they are in more demand, their wage is higher. Okay? So that's we call biased technological progress. Actually, quite often people use skill biased technological progress or skill biased technological change. So sometimes people call SBTC, I think, skill biased technological change. So that's the idea. So let's say, so to make this more formal, how does it affect the demand? Actually, I gave you the intuitive explanation, but to formalize the explanation, let's think of a production function that is made up this way. So production depends on the number of high-skilled workers and number of low-skilled workers. So they combine them, and then they produce the final product. But what happens here is that what matters is not exactly the number of workers, but actually times A. A, you can think of it as the productivity of that type of worker. So AH times NH is productivity adjusted, okay, number of high-skilled workers input. And AL, NL is a productivity adjusted input of low-skilled workers. Okay? So that's the idea, basic idea. Then, AH is the efficiency per unit of high-skilled labor. Okay, that's what we explain it. Okay. Now, if you recall the cost minimizing condition is just that W over R equals MPL over MPK. Now here we don't have K, right? But basically it's the same thing. NH and L, there are two inputs, okay? So the ratio of two inputs cost should be equal to ratio of their marginal productivity, okay? But in this case, since there is AH and AL, actually their marginal productivity has the term of AL and AH. Okay. Or actually we can write down this way. Actually you can see it, in a way it's this. It's not just their wage, okay? It's a wage per unit of efficiency. Okay? So this is efficiency adjusted wage. Okay? So as you can see that if AH goes up, right? And this denominator becomes smaller. Okay? So you can think of this way. If each worker has higher productivity, right? Then in a way actually you pay lower wage. Right? So let's say you use the same worker, let's say the same worker became more productive. Then even if you pay the same monetary term, let's say $1,000, but this worker became more productive, in that sense, actually, this worker became more cheaper, right? So that's how you look at that way. So it's not just WH over WL. Actually, it's WH divided by AH and WL divided by AL. Okay? So you can think of it like efficiency adjusted wage rate. Okay? Okay, so it's like you're like a wage per unit of efficiency. You can think of that way. Now, then idea actually became pretty simple. Okay, even though I have a diagram here. Okay, what happens is. Okay, what happens? So. In the cost minimizing condition, basically what happens is, this is familiar. This is isoquant curve and this is isocost line. So isoquant curve and isocost line should meet each other, and the slope of isocost line should be WH over WL. But actually, in this case, it's not just WH over WL. It's WH divided by AH divided by WL divided by AL. So it's basically the same diagram. But there is a wage rate adjusted for their efficiency unit. And then the idea is just simple. If technological progress increases AH over AL, so skilled workers became more productive relative to low-skilled workers. Okay? That's why we call it skill-biased technological change. Okay? And high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers must be substitutable. Okay? If they are not substitutable, it doesn't actually affect much. So they are substitutable, and skilled workers became more productive. Then employer will substitute high-skilled labor for low-skilled labor for given wage and output. Okay? Simply because they are more productive. Okay? Actually, if you think of a neutral technological progress, let's say AH over AL doesn't change. So let's say technological progress has happened, but let's say it increased productivity of high-skilled and low-skilled by the same ratio. Let's say they become both become twice as productive as before, then AH over AL will be the same, right? Even though it's just a times 2. Okay? Then what would happen is, if you think about it, they can actually produce the same output using lower input, right? Because since, let's say, both became equally productive, then you can produce the same thing using lower input. Okay? So that's why, for example, in the sense that this, if let's say there is a neutral change in the productivity, then this whole isoquantum curve actually goes down, even though it's the same quantity. Okay, it needs less labor because AH and AL became bigger. But what happened here is, let's say, so that's the E prime case. Okay, this is a neutral change in technological progress. Okay, but what has happened is actually this way, because AH over AL became bigger. Okay, so AH got bigger than AL in the ratio, so whole slope will be flatter. Okay, so what happens? It will change from E prime to E2 prime. So because of substitution, okay, we have relatively more demand for high-skilled to low-skilled workers. Okay, so the simple idea is pretty much this. Since high-skilled workers became more productive relative to low-skilled workers, it's basically as if high-skilled workers' wage actually got lower, right? Because high-skilled workers can produce more than before relative to low-skilled workers' production. So since they are more cheaper, employers want substitute high-skilled for low-skilled workers. So that's a substitution part. Okay, obviously there is a scale effect part. Since high-skilled workers became more productive, probably they want to increase actual production, so they will increase demand for both type of workers. So there is actually substitution and scale effect, but if substitution effect is greater than the scale effect, then you can make an argument that skill bias technological progress will increase the demand for high-skilled workers relative to low-skilled workers. Okay? So actually what's important here is that high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers are substitutes, easily substitutable. Okay? If they are complements, actually there will be mostly scale effect. Okay? But if they are easily substitutable, then substitution effect is big. So substitution of low-skilled workers with high-skilled workers will dominate the scale effect of increasing the demand for both type of workers. So high-skilled workers will be relatively more demanded. Okay, that's the basic idea. Okay? But actually there is another question. The another question is, why skill bias technological progress happens in the first place? Okay? So let's say you think of a technological change. Actually lots of people think the technological change is something like natural phenomena. It's like a technological change just happens, right? Like it's like a scientific progress. People often believe that scientific progress has nothing to do with economics, but that's absolutely wrong. Okay? Why do we invest in certain technology? Because in lots of cases, it makes money, right? So if you think about scientific progress requires investment in often of very large resources, right? So we know that resources are limited. So actually, society, individuals, investors, governments should choose which scientific technology you want to invest, right? That's obviously, the economic decision. So technological progress is actually itself is not just automatic, progress of human knowledge. It's actually conscientious choice by societies, individuals, investors, and all those things. Okay? So, in that sense, that's why, for example, like if probably when you're young or when you, let's say 10 years ago, when you read some magazines and they talk about all those different technologies that will change our world in 10 years, in 20 years. When I was young, actually in this around time, in 21st century, I thought that I was going to be flying, flying all over the place using like a jetpack or, those kind of things, People are flying. When you see the science fiction movies, people are flying. Actually, I believe that I would be flying right now. Okay, but I take subways. Okay, what's wrong? Okay, so if you think of all those newses of new technology that's gonna change our world, there are 10s, 20, and hundreds of technologies people talk about, and probably in some lab of some university, they may start a certain development. But what happens at the end is obviously that some technologies actually developed. Lots of them are basically forgotten, right? So what happens? Because people make choices what technology should be invested, right? Depending on, let's say, their cost, right? Some technology is just too expensive to develop. It doesn't make any economic sense to just invest money in that, right? Even though, I may be flying, if we invest everything in jetpacks, probably that is just way too expensive to do it. Probably it makes more sense to develop something else, right? So when you think about the technological progress, it usually, probably not everything, but it usually has some logic behind it, economic logic behind it, why we chose this technology over that technology, right? So there's a question why the SBTC, Skill Bias Technology Progress, or Skill Bias Technology Change, has happened. Why do we invest in technologies that makes skilled workers more productive, not the unskilled workers? Okay, so then there is some theory about it, and then but one convincing story is simply, in a way, it's this: because we have lots of skilled workers. Okay, it's a very simple idea. You have skilled workers and unskilled workers. You have a choice between making skill bias technological, so between investing in a technology that makes the skilled workers more productive or unskilled workers more productive. Then you found that in this country, skilled workers, number of skilled workers are growing, I say, because of the, people go to colleges much more often than they used to. Okay, the education system has improved. So people became more and more skilled. So in a way, in our society, we have a large supply of skilled workers into our society. Then what technology you should choose? It's a simple economic decision. You should choose a technology that makes most economic sense. That is the technology that makes skilled workers more productive, right? Because it will affect large percentage of our workforce, so it will be much more profitable, right? Let's say if you invest in technology that makes relatively fewer number of unskilled workers more productive, then that's just not a good choice to use your resources, limited resources, right? So that's the thing. Okay, so that's the whole idea is this. So increased supply of skilled labor actually encourage R&D in technologies that raise productivity of skilled workers. Okay. So in a way, it's a bit of like a cycle, because we have a increased supply of high skilled workers. Okay, and we believe that actually in the simple economic reasoning is it should lower the wage of high-skilled workers because we have more supply of high-skilled workers. But in this case, there is a large supply of high-skilled workers that actually leads a technological change that makes high-skilled workers more productive. So they became actually more demanded than they are used to. So the idea is the increased labor supply of high-skilled workers actually contributing to developing skill-biased technology. And that itself, it makes income inequality, income distribution more unequal. Okay? So it's like a bit of a bit of a counterintuitive chain when you think of it at first, because at the end what it says is the increased labor supply of high-skilled workers made income inequality actually more unequal. Okay? But actually in usual sense, you think that increased supply of high-skilled workers should make income distribution more equal, but actually it goes the other way because skill bias technological change at the middle. Okay? So that's the idea. So this technological change is like it's quite interesting thing. Actually, if you listen to like engineers and scientists talk about the technological change, and they often assume that this technological change is like something like a natural phenomenon that it just happens. But actually it's not. You know, you should know that the society actually deliberately made choices every time when their new technologies just come up, right? So that's the idea. Okay, so then actually the question is, as I said, that this whole thing makes sense only when skilled and unskilled workers are close substitutes. So they actually did a study and they found that in most OECD countries, skilled workers and unskilled workers are very close substitutes. Okay? So if the unskilled workers became more productive, they can actually easily substitute low-skilled workers. Right? Okay, so, but if you recall, that's technological progress is not just happened this time, right? So we had lots of technological progress in before, like we had in 18th century, 17th, 18th century, especially 18th century, we had an industrial revolution. Right? In early 20th century, we have mechanization of lots of manufacturing sectors. We Henry Ford made a conveyor belt and started making Model T automobiles at an unprecedented speed and all those things. So actually the society has gone through many different technological changes. Okay? And actually if you look at the income inequality for longer period of the time, in Korea's case, I showed you from about early 1990s that it became more unequal. But actually, if you look at the longer period, between 1980 and about early 1990s, Korea's income distribution has more equal, actually. Yeah. So there is a period of equalization and unequalization. Actually, when you look at the U.S., basically the same. In the U.S., in 1970s, their income distribution has become more equal. And then since 1980, the U.S.'s income distribution has become more unequal. In Korea's case, 80s was a period of more equalizing income distribution. And then early, let's say 1993, 1995, it's become more unequal. Okay? So there is a period of equalizing income distribution. And one idea goes that around that time, the technological change was actually advantageous to unskilled workers, relatively, not skilled workers. Okay? So mechanization and robotization actually made the productivity of low-skilled workers actually more productive, higher. Okay? So that was the time. But now people think that information technology, especially, is making skilled workers more productive relative to unskilled workers. Okay? So the technological change has happened, so that contributed to increasing income inequality. Okay, so that's the idea of SBTC. Okay, so I said computerization, okay, is the idea. But I will talk about the problems. The thing is that people, okay, I would say that the general consensus is that SBTC, I've just used SBTC. The general consensus is that SBTC is important in explaining increasing income inequality. So that's the general consensus. But it does not necessarily mean that there are people who actually oppose the idea of the SBTC is the primary reason why the income inequality has increased. Okay. The problem here is that first thing is that actually there is some evidence. Actually, okay, okay. First thing, it's not clear what constitutes the bias to technological progress. We just talked about computerization, but it's not actually clear that computerization is the SBTC. Okay, there is some studies that show some conflicting evidence. Okay, so it's not exactly. You know, the story seems to be plausible, but it's not precisely right. Okay, so the idea happens something like SBTC. The timing of, let's say, computerization and timing of increasing income inequality does not necessarily match. Okay, so that's one problem. That bias technological progress itself is very, you know, in a way, it's very imprecise term, okay? We just call it skill bias technological progress, but it does not, we are not for sure that what is exactly, you know, that. Okay, that's the first thing. That second argument is related to the first one, because since it's just a very abstract term, actually, so what people actually use this term is they just call everything else SBTC, right? For example, we talk about international trade. So international trade explains some, okay? Immigration, it's not that much. Let's say it explains a little bit. But actually there are other explanations I didn't mention in our class. For example, in the US, there is actually a strong argument that minimum wage, okay? Because as I think I mentioned it before, since in the US, minimum wage hasn't changed much. It just changes very infrequently because they have to go through Congress in the let's say in the federal level. So what usually happens is that it's just nominally it's fixed, and then its real term it's decreasing. Okay. So when you are talking about income inequality, we are actually talking about real income inequality. So we measure it using real income. So what happens is that if you just think of the minimum wage as the idea, then low wage workers get the minimum wage. But over time, their value of minimum wage is just decreasing. Okay? Then you can actually simply, because of that, income inequality has increased. Okay? And it happens that, for example, in the US, from 1980 to, let's say, mid-1990s, they didn't change federal minimum wage at all. So it actually made some sense, actually made a lot of sense to some people that minimum wage is responsible for making income inequality rising. Okay? I didn't mention it in here because it's not the case in Korea. In Korea, I showed you the minimum wage has been increasing basically, and then it has increased faster than the inflation rate. So it actually doesn't match what happens to our country. But in the US, actually, there is actually strong argument that believes that minimum wage is the problem. Okay? But there are people who think it's not the problem. But anyway, so there are strong arguments. So so minimum wage may explain what happened in the US, for example. And there is another argument in the US especially is deunionization, because unions has become weaker and weaker over the years. Okay, so in the US, for example, when you compare, let's say, unionization rate is simply, just think of this way: percentage of workers who are union members among all the workers who may join union. Okay? So unionization rate is a way of measuring how strong union is. If the union has, let's say, lots of members, it has become stronger because they can negotiate the terms on behalf of large number of workers with employers. Or if the union is stronger and more people want to join the union, so it's basically the reinforcing each other. And what happens, actually not only in the US, but happens in most developed countries, over the years, unionization rate has fallen. Okay, that's just a rate that's different. It's just that some European countries generally have higher unionization rate, and US, for example, has relatively much lower unionization rate. And still, but it's true that even in European countries, unionization rate has become lower. And what happens to union is that union, when they negotiate wages with employers, then union tend to make income distribution within the union members more equal. Why? Because if, let's say, the union members have very different wage levels among themselves, then it's quite difficult for them to unite, okay? And then, successfully negotiate wages with the employers. Because if they are more heterogeneous, then union members will have much more diverse voices. Then, obviously, it's going to make the union representatives' life will be much more difficult if their union members want all different things. But if they are homogeneous, it's much more easier, okay, for them to represent their unions. So union wages tend to be more equal than the wage distribution among non-union members. Right? So that's an empirical fact. When you look at the data, union members have more equal income distribution than non-union members. It's actually true in Korea as well. And so when you think of, okay, the union membership has become smaller and smaller, which means what? Income distribution can become more unequal because there is less pressure to make income distribution more equal. Right? So that's the idea that deunionization has contributed to increasing income inequality. Actually, it makes some sense, okay, in lots of countries. I didn't mention it in our case because Korea's unionization rate, first, it actually has been decreasing since late 1980s, actually. So it has decreased way before the increasing inequality happened. And second is that Korea's unionization rate did not change much, actually, since mid-2000. Actually, Korea's unionization rate is very, very low. It's 10%. So only 1 out of 10 workers are union members. Okay. Part of the reason is that lots of Korean workers actually work for small companies. Okay. Most of unions are organized in large corporations. Okay. Hyundai Automobiles, like those corporations they have unions. The corporations you don't know, usually they don't have unions. One reason is that if you're a union organizer, let's say, it's much easier and much more, in a sense, makes more sense to organize union in large corporations. Because in large corporations has market power. They have profits. Profits means, okay, if you have a strong union, actually you can raise your wage much easier. Because your employer has lots of profits, let's share it. If you don't share it, we will make your life painful. Okay? So since they have large profits, they are willing to share. But smaller companies have much lower profit margin. So it's going to be much more difficult for them to raise the wage rate. So from union organizers' point of view, organizing union in large corporation is much easier and much more effective, okay? And the union in large corporations are much more stronger than unions in smaller companies. Okay, so that makes sense to have unions in large corporations, and in Korea's case it's a bit extreme because most of the union members are in large corporations. Okay. So in Korea's case, actually the trend of deunionization does not exactly match what happened to income inequality, so I didn't mention it here. But as I said, in lots of places, especially in the US, for example, deunionization is also considered to be an important reason why income inequality has happened. Okay, so we have like various explanations, and obviously that not just one can explain everything. Okay, it seems like, you know, these things can explain whole trend in combinations. Okay, so then SBTC, where the SBTC come from? Okay, SBTC actually come from in the sense that, okay, we have all the other explanations, but still it seems like it does not explain everything. Okay, it can explain only part of the whole picture. Then we have unexplained part, and quite often people think that unexplained part must be SBTC. Okay, so because SBTC is not such an imprecise, it's not just such a precise concept, you can just put everything together in it. Okay, so we have explanation by trade, union, minimum wage, or immigration. Then we have unexplained part. Then we need to explain this unexplained part. How do you explain it? Okay, there must be technological change because we cannot come up with something else. So it seems to be a pretty good idea that there is some change in technology that is not captured actually in the data, but you know, it's still important. So that in a way that makes sense, but still it's just that unexplained part. So we have explanation by SBTC, but it's not totally satisfactory. Okay. But still, the general consensus is that SBTC seems to be quite important because really there was a change in technology. We all know that we have seen how this, you know, the management and manufacturing has changed. So it's there. Okay, it's there. But so SBTC is important. Okay, but it's not like a complete picture. It seems. Okay, we may find something else. Okay, but still here that we can explain increasing income inequality this way. Okay, so as I said, that up to this point will be covered by the midterm exam next Wednesday. Okay, so I think I will stop here today. Okay.